Hello, this webinar is focusing on Standard 6, the Inquiry Arc in Social Studies. The state of Maryland has 6 social studies standards. They are Standard 1, Civics, 2, People and Nations of the World, 3, Geography, 4, Economics, 5, History, 6, Skills and Processes. Together, these inform the development of local curricula and provide guidance to teachers on the expectations for social studies education in Maryland. This webinar will focus on the 6th standard, Skills and Processes. Standard 6.0 was updated as a part of the 2014-15 Standards Review. The C3 framework influenced much of those updates. As a result of years of research and collaboration among teachers and academics in the field of social studies education, the National Council for Social Studies published the College Career and Civic Life Framework in 2013. It was intended to be a guide for social studies curriculum writers in their incorporation of the most effective research-based practices in social studies education. The C3 outlines social studies instruction according to 4 dimensions. As you can see here on your screen, Dimension 1 is developing questions and planning inquiries, having students question the world around them, reacting to stimuli, primary sources, in order to identify compelling questions that they then want to seek answers to. In Dimension 2, they apply the disciplinary tools and concepts, and in social studies, that's civics, economics, geography, and history, to gather information about their compelling question that they established under Dimension 1. In Dimension 3, they set about gathering those sources and evaluating them, establishing credibility, looking for corroboration, and from there, identifying claims and evidence that support those claims. In Dimension 4, they communicate conclusions and take conformed actions. This can take a variety of formats. Sometimes it's argumentative writing activity, sometimes it's speaking, and sometimes it's inside the classroom, and sometimes it's outside, with the goal being finding authentic audiences in which students can interact and take that informed action. As a part of the Social Studies Standards Review process, Standard 6.0 was updated to include many of the concepts included in that C3 framework. While unique to Maryland, this standard reflects much of the approach of the C3. The updates in the 2014 revision process were made in order to capture the best of the 2006 Skills and Processes document, the processes from C3, as well as build connections to Maryland's college and career readiness standards. You'll notice that the organization of subcategories within Standard 6.0 reflect the 4 dimensions of the C3 framework to a great extent. For example, here you're looking at the Social Studies Skills and Processes Standard 6.0, and you can see where just the top of the page there, the way it's organized, developing questions and planning inquiries is the first subcategory within the framework for the 6.0 standard. However, in addition to the skills and content, and processes, that are also grade banded to reflect what students should be able to know and do as they progress through these grade levels from pre-K through grade 12. The dimensions of the C3 framework, the 4 dimensions that we saw earlier, in the state of Maryland are reflected in the inquiry arc. So here we see those 4 dimensions displayed through this inquiry arc. We have students starting with questions, using disciplinary tools, evaluating sources, establishing credibility, and looking for corroboration, and ultimately sharing those conclusions. Let's explore this arc by taking a closer look at questioning. So for that, we're going to be looking into Dimension 1, a little exercise in inquiry. Let's assume that you're working with an 8th grade Civil War and Reunion unit with the essential question, how does war impact and change society? What you could do is get students questioning this time period by having them analyze this photograph. But we're not going to show them the whole photograph. Let's start by just having them consider the bottom left-hand corner and ask questions like, what do you notice in the photo? What do you wonder about the photo? For example, a student may notice a man holding an umbrella. This may cause them to then wonder, is he using the umbrella as protection from rain? Maybe sun? And why are they standing there? You'd have students continue that questioning process to pull out as many details as they can from just this one quadrant. And again, the goal here is to stimulate that wondering and that curiosity about what they're seeing and what the photograph that they're interacting with. We then move to the opposite corner, and we're going to repeat the same process. So we would ask students, all right, let's look at this top right-hand quadrant. What do you notice? And what do you wonder? And again, you'd have students record those thoughts as you go through that discussion. You're going to repeat that process in the top left-hand corner. And again, having students identifying the parts of the photograph and identifying the questions they raise in that analysis. And you'd finish then with the fourth quadrant of the photo. What do you notice? And what do you wonder? Giving students enough time. I'm moving through quickly for the sake of this webinar, but you would give students anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, or maybe longer, depending on your class, time to really delve into the details of each quadrant of that photograph. And then move on to considering the full photograph. So now that we see the full photograph, and we've looked at the individual parts, we could ask students, what questions came to your mind as we revealed each corner? What did you notice and wonder as you began to see more and more of the photograph revealed? Now, let's consider the photograph as a whole and ask students, what kind of questions did you come up with as you were going through, and what questions do you have now? There are lots of possible things that kids are going to come up with when they look at a photograph such as this. Here are some examples that I've heard. Why are the men in uniform? Why are they watching this event? Why are there no shoes? Why are there soldiers and civilians there? Who are the men on the top of the wall? And who's being executed? And why are they being executed? And the list can go on and on. The goal here is not to limit the curiosity, but allow students the opportunity to really think about this photograph in a way that is uninhibited. There's no right answer. What questions does this bring out in their minds? Then connect it back to what they've been studying. So how does all of this connect with what we've been studying about the Civil War and our unit of Civil War and Reunion? Here's just some examples of the types of questions that students might raise when they attempt to connect the photograph and the information they've just kind of questioned to what they've been learning in class. Who was held responsible for past injustices? How did they overcome their differences? After the Civil War, what technology was available to people during this time period? That one usually comes up because they notice in the photograph that there are people there with various forms of technology, whether it be a camera or a weapon of some sort. And that technology question sometimes comes up as well. Again, the goal here is not to limit, but to expand and encourage the curiosity about the time period and about the primary source with which they're interacting. These questions then become the basis of the new learning as the class moves into the new unit about how war impacted the country and their attempts at reconstruction. So we can categorize these questions, we can group the students according to questions, and allow them to drive our learning as we move through that inquiry arc. So we've from here, we've done an exercise in questioning. We've done a very brief one and a very short illustration of it in class. Sometimes this phase of questioning and planning your inquiry can take an entire mod, and sometimes it's just a brief engagement exercise as you start a unit or as you start a lesson. But from there, you move in to the second phase of the ARC by identifying the disciplinary tools they would use to investigate their questions. The inquiry arc became the central instructional model for the social studies statewide. As you can see here, this is what reflects the C3 framework. So as we move through the Maryland inquiry arc, we're moving through those same dimensions in the C3. And in our exercise today, we've gone through questioning, and then we would move to disciplinary tools. We'd go about gathering sources, and then developing claims with appropriate evidence, and sharing those conclusions. This inquiry arc also supports the development of performance-based assessment types, which are mandated by the state legislature for standardized assessments in middle school and high school. Additional webinars will focus on those new assessment limits and those assessment types. Given the organic nature and creative nature of compelling questions and planning inquiries, stakeholders, including teachers, district supervisors, and academics, identified that evaluating sources and sharing conclusions would be the portion of this inquiry arc that would be assessed on portions of the statewide exams in middle school U.S. history and high school American government. So again, while instruction in the state of Maryland will move through this full arc, in terms of statewide assessment, we are focusing on evaluating sources and sharing conclusions. So let's take a look quickly at those statewide course requirements. They're shown here on your screen, and Standard 6.0 should be guiding the social studies instruction from pre-K through 12 in each of these courses. In addition, in middle school U.S. history and in high school American government, the 6.0 standard is included in the assessment limits for those statewide examinations. So while the 6.0 is introduced here and developed here and moves from the elementary level into the middle school level, and again is revisited and strengthened and developed in grades 6 and 7, we see it assessed for the first time on the statewide level in 8th grade U.S. history. And then again in high school, we're going to see 6.0 in this inquiry arc in modern world history, American government, and U.S. history in high school. But it is also included on that American government high school assessment. So the inquiry arc is in Standard 6.0 is the illustration of Standard 6.0 in the state of Maryland, which binds the skills and processes for the entire pre-K to 12 experience in social studies in the state of Maryland. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you in future webinars.